very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
Now we need a sense of global responsibility. Think 6 billion humanity equal.
Sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great.
Because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping.
It is time that we all perceive gender on a spectrum instead of two sets of opposing ideals.
We must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force.
Within the sound of silence.
But in order to talk freely of those things, you have to release yourself of those pains.
You see, love liberates. It doesn't bind. Love says, I love you. I love you if you're in China. I love you if you're across town. I love you if you're in Harlem. I love you.
If you hit a talib with your shoe, then there would be no difference between you and that talib. You must not treat others that much with cruelty and that much harshly. You must fight others, but through peace and through dialogue and through education. Then I said, I'll tell him how important education is and that I even want education for your children as well. And I'll tell him, that's what I want to tell you. Now do what you want.
And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more.
You can be that great a generation.
I said that why shall I wait for someone else? Why shall I be looking to the government, to the army, that they would help us? Why don't I raise my voice? Why don't we speak up for our rights?
One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
You know what's right. Just do right. You don't really have to ask anybody. The truth is, right may not be expedient, it may not be profitable, but it will satisfy your soul.
Of course, the task will not be easy, but not to do this would be a crime against humanity.
All that is needed for the forces of evil to triumph is for good men and women to do nothing.
Think about my granddad's lap. Think often about that night. About how some people are waiting for people like us to slide our hands against their walls and say, close your eyes. I'm going to turn on a light.
Welcome to the Forum on CHRW. My name is David Seston. In ancient Rome, the Forum stood as a place where all were able to come out and discuss matters of public interest and concern, and they were able to do so in a free and open environment. Recently, at Western University and other universities around the world, students do not feel that they are able to speak their minds or ask the questions about subjects that concern them. They feel they will be judged by their friends, their peers, and their seniors because they question what's being told to them and whether what they're being told is right or wrong. We cannot have a free and just society where people are afraid to ask the questions and are afraid to speak up. This forum is a project aiming to open dialogue on these subjects that concern students. It is a place where students can talk to other students while trying to get an idea on the concepts that are floating around them without knowing why it's there. There won't be any professors or academics lecturing. This forum will be the student's voice. Because if you hear us talk about it, then maybe it's okay for you to talk about it with your friends and your classmates. The forum will focus on the what, the why, and the how. What the issue is, why it has become an issue, and how it affects Western students specifically and university students in general. What we're talking about today is racism at Western. Why? I wish I could say that it wasn't an issue. I wish I could sit here a month and a half into 2016 and say that we had conquered racism and that the dream had come true. Unfortunately, if I said that, it would be a lie. Racism is just as prevalent today as it was 53 years ago when Dr. King stood in the shadow of the great emancipator. Unfortunately, it's less obvious. Racism has learned. It's grown more cunning and more insidious. It's no longer a sign on the door that says whites only, or a man coming to your home to take your children to a residential school for the year. It's hiding behind the keyboard on the internet and whispering into your ear that maybe the history books might be lying, and that some things never happened. How this affects Western University students is unique. The fact of the matter is, unless you personally witness it or have it happen to you, it might not affect you at all. You might be able to go 4 years and not notice a single problem, and that's the scariest thought. Because then you start to think that maybe the problem is gone. Maybe we beat racism. As Canadians, and particularly here at Western, it's easy to forget the state of the world. The reality is, racism is visible every day. We just have to know where to look. Perhaps it's as simple as having a discussion with your friends about what groups they won't date. Or maybe why certain groups can have student unions and other ones shouldn't. Maybe it's obvious, students being divided during a protest because of the color of their skin. But every day, someone you know is affected by it, and that's one person too many. So today's topic, we're talking about racism at Western, and I'm joined in the studio by Greg and Bianca. And Greg is a fifth-year history student, and Bianca is a first-year MIT student. And it's a hard subject we're talking about today because nobody really wants to admit that racism exists or that it's as prevalent as it is. And my first question really was going to be, do you think racism exists at Western? And then I sat down and thought, no, there's 36,000 students at Western. Racism exists. It's here. So I think what we need to talk about is more how to deal with it. So my first question is, as I look at my notes, do you think Western students are accepting of racism? And when I talk about racism like that, I don't mean institutional racism. It's like what you see on television, or, these are, cultural norms or stuff like that, whatever you want to call it. But if a professor was being racist while teaching a class, or you see a couple of guys walking down the street and harass somebody else, how do you think it's tolerated, I guess?
I think, of course, overt racism is an issue. I don't think some students would stand around and see a student being ostracized because of their race, except I think it's accepted to some degree through culture, through television, and especially through comedy. Comedians, our favorites like Chris Rock, almost use it as a big platform for a lot of their skits, because it kind of gives something that's a topic that doesn't want to be addressed, such as racism, a kind of lighthearted feel to it, that it's inherent, it's there in our culture. We can't change it, but let's try to make it a little fun and play around with it. So I think to some degree, in terms of in dialogues between friends and family, it can kind of be thrown around as a joke and an easy topic to talk about. But I think, of course, it's not tolerated if it's overt and kind of aggressive.
Yeah, it's kind of play off on that. Obviously, kind of blatant, severe, overt, institutionalized racism is something that everyone can kind of recognize fairly easily and can kind of speak up against. But it's kind of when it gets scaled back a little bit that it becomes a little bit more contentious. Race in and of itself has no real scientific basis. Racism pretty much is kind of whatever we want it to be, and well, not want it to be, but whatever we kind of feel like making it. And so that kind of makes it a whole hodgepodge of, are you just being offensive to somebody, or is it a more racist kind of backdrop? And once you kind of really try and dredge through that, it gets more difficult, because it's not like we can completely eradicate people being offensive to one another, because not everybody is a perfect human being, and sometimes we're mean to each other, and in a perfect world that wouldn't happen. But it's trying to figure out where the line is between actual racism and where these kind of offensive opinions are coming from, and where it's just kind of, I don't like this person, I don't like his or her friends, let's gonna kind of be mean to them,
Okay. Have you guys experienced any, or experienced, has it happened to you? One of the big things I'm doing on the forum is I'm not identifying anybody's race, anybody's last name, anything like that, because I don't feel that it's an identifying factor that I want to bring into the conversation. So this is open to anybody. Has anybody experienced racism on campus? Have you seen it? Have you experienced it? What happened? or hope. The big hope is no, I didn't. I haven't seen this in any way, shape, or form. But that's unfortunately not a reality.
Fortunately for me, I don't think I've ever really firsthand experienced it. Not in a way that really kind of affected me. There's been little things where people are just kind of saying things that are maybe taken a little bit too casually than they should be, and that's kind of a lesser problem, I guess, than a bigger institutional concern. But I don't think I've really personally encountered overt, blatant racism that's kind of like really troubled me on campus. But at the same time, I know other people that have. Okay. And while I haven't completely talked to them about their stories and what they had to say about it, I know that it did happen, and it does kind of trouble them a lot more than I've been able to personally witness or experience. So I know that it is out there. Okay.
Before I go respond to that one, we'll go over to Bianca. I know you actually have, because we've talked about this a little bit. Briefly, what have you experienced? Because I know it's kind of involved.
Yeah, I haven't personally encountered direct personal racism, except I have, of course, witnessed a friend just over conversation expressing certain views towards Middle Easterns and kind of painting them with a big paintbrush that all of them express certain characteristics and personality features, and that he chooses to just simply not interact with them because of that. He knows that for sure that he will not get along with any of them because of their race, and it's awful. And of course, and when it comes up in a conversation, it's difficult to respond in a way that you don't want to be too aggressive in saying that person is wrong, because it's a difficult topic.
Well, and that's just it. And I think part of the biggest problem is everybody is afraid to say something. You don't want to hurt your friend's feelings. You don't want to, paint the other people that you're like, oh no, you're wrong.
Yeah.
But there are certain times, I think, when maybe that's necessary, where you've got to say, hey, maybe you're not coming at this from the right. Have you considered this? And if it extends, if it goes even worse, then I think we do need to tell our friends, no, you're wrong. This is wrong. So I guess circling to it through sort of the student point of view, I guess I should state here for the record, the Western policy is zero tolerance. The soft policy is zero tolerance. The residence policy is zero tolerance. If it's witnessed, if it's if you see it, if you hear it, if it happens, it's zero tolerance. And I believe you're expelled, aren't you?
I believe so, yeah. Okay.
I'm asking Greg because he's a soph. and he might actually know it. And the two first years in the conversation are like, oh. Okay. So I guess this segues quite nicely into this sort of the second sort of conversation. The bigger conversation is how do you talk to your friends about this? How do we, as students, engage other students in anti-racism? How do you go about it?
I think that approach is something that's often really difficult, just because it's so easy to take a stance against overt racism. If somebody's kind of more, I hate using this phrase, but casually racist and kind of not really aware that they're being, I guess, offensive or insensitive, then they're really not willing to admit it. And even if you bring it up in kind of the nicest, most understanding way possible, you're still probably going to get some pushback, just because people generally don't want to accept or believe that their viewpoint or their way of carrying themselves comes across as racist. And kind of, I've made a mistake before where I have been a little bit too overt to point it out, and I got way more pushback than I probably deserved, just because I came about it the complete wrong way, and kind of nothing got resolved there, and it was a whole mess. But
so, because this is actually really, really important to the conversation, do you mind talking about what happened?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I was back when I was in first year.
Oh, long time ago.
Long time ago. I'm dating myself here. So some people on my floor were very liberal with the N-word, just as a colloquialism to kind of talk to each other with. None of them were actually African American, though. Not that particularly matters, but
that is a whole different conversation.
Yeah. I just thought it bore mentioning, but yeah. So not African Americans, very liberal with the use of the use of the N-word, and I kind of would be around it and very much would say, hey, can you not say that? That makes me really uncomfortable. It's kind of very inappropriate to call each other that at all. And they kind of had the response that no, they thought it was fine. There was kind of nobody else around to hear it, so it was okay to say that.
Okay.
Or it's like, you're not black, so it's not offending anybody. Why should it offend you?
Exactly. And that was their approach, and I kind of, again, was a little bit brash and flew off the handle a little bit there, and kind of really I put forth some passionate, if not well thought out arguments against it, and it just did not go over very well for me, and ended up a whole big fight with everybody that again didn't really result in anything positive or constructive. So I do believe that I had a point there. It's just that my approach was way more aggressive than it should have been, and nothing got resolved, and there was no progression there.
I'm going to say, Bianca, do you have anything to say to that? Or, well, I sort of collect myself. Greg has actually done something very rare in that I need a minute to actually collect my thoughts on that one.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go over to Bianca.
That's all right. I think it's extremely hard to not just explode on the person with outrage and just saying that you're wrong, because they are inherently wrong in some areas, but we have to acknowledge that due to ideologies and also their own personal beliefs and religions, their upbringing, it shapes everything. So my question, I don't know, to you guys, like, is it for us to say that they are wrong? Because I mean, it is, we see that it is, but say, I don't know, I have a friend who, due to just, I guess, national and pride for their culture, he chooses to hate Arabs because of the history between the Persians and the Arabs. He just will. And I said, if you meet an Arab who you didn't know that they were Arab at first, but you become good friends with them and you like them, and you suddenly discover that of their background, does that affect your opinion of them afterwards? He goes, no, but it does not change my opinion about their country as a whole and everything. So I don't know. What do you
I think that's largely where we get some problems, because people get so wrapped up in their own kind of point of view of it. And with my personal example that I just gave, it wasn't more about me telling them that they were wrong per se. It was more just that it bothered me personally.
Yes.
And because I was arguing it so kind of aggressively, they just didn't care. So they didn't care that it bothered me because I was kind of being a jerk about it. And so that made it kind of okay for them to continue. And it's one of those things where you can kind of be aware that what you're saying isn't really the best thing to do, but you may not necessarily care just because you're so set in your own ways, in your own culture, and you don't particularly want to change that if you don't see the utility.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think this goes with racism and sexism and a lot of different problems in our society where people are just like, it's there, stop complaining, what are you going to do about it? Everybody knows it happens, don't try to change it.
Well, that becomes the biggest question, and becomes the biggest fear, is that if we don't talk about it, if we don't discuss it, nothing ever comes. So bringing up what you guys were just talking about, and yes, I have had a few moments to collect my thoughts and actually come up with something. The first question, I guess, comes out of that is, what you're talking about is, if there's nobody, if it's a bunch of white people sitting around and we're talking negatively about another race, is it racist because none of them are around to be offended?
Oh, now you've got us kind of stumped
so
for
it's
the moment.
Sorry, so if they're not in the room,
is it if there's nobody around to be offended, is it racist?
I still think it is.
Of course.
Like, I don't know. I just see that as, of course it is. It doesn't, I don't think it matters.
Exactly. and that's just it. So Greg, you're the I'm not I don't know if they were your friends or not. I know how my feeling on that would go. Their comment was, well, you're not black, you shouldn't be offended by it, is ridiculous on its face value. That's like saying, oh, well, we're being homophobic, but you're not gay, so it's not a problem.
That happened to me,
exactly.
and I was like,
You know.
or it was like, they're like, but I was like, you shouldn't say retarded, like, I don't know, and it was just in a weird context, and they were like, but are you retarded? Are you retarded? Or are you gay? Are you gay? I was like, do I have a right to answer that? Or like, does anybody here, like, that makes people feel uncomfortable? It's not right to say.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think this is one of my sort of big issues that comes up, is that just because there's nobody around to hear it doesn't mean you're any less racist for doing it. There has become a casualness to certain language, to certain ideas and ideologies, that just because somebody of color isn't there, just because somebody of a different sexuality is there, doesn't make it okay for you to say it out loud in public. I'm also a big defender of personal rights, and fortunately or unfortunately, you have the right to say whatever you want in your home. And I guess this becomes really interesting when we start talking about residence, because that is technically your home.
Yeah.
However, so what really floored me by your statement, Greg, was having been in the workforce for a long time myself, most companies' policies flat out say, if you're offended by something, you tell the person and you go with that. So for them to go, well, no, this isn't a thing. Well, no, literally, I am offended. It doesn't matter what color my face is. I find the sheer weight of what you're saying to be offensive. Please stop.
Yeah, and that's what I was honestly hoping for, and what I almost would have expected. But
I'm sorry. Like, as far as I'm concerned, that should have been,
end of it. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I just found it's hard with stuff like this to make people care, because either there's the whole saying that's been going around, it's not enough to not be racist, you have to be actively against racism for any sort of change or any positive stance to happen. And that's kind of what that was. They weren't, I'm not going to say that they were all flagrant racist for using the term, perhaps just more so insensitive than anything, but they weren't kind of against it, and they didn't really care that I took such offense to it. And that's kind of where the bigger problem was, because they couldn't bring themselves to care about other people's feelings in a way that kind of made it a safe, maybe not safe, but a working, comfortable environment for everybody.
Yeah. And with your friend Bianca, the one who has some problems with people of a different race.
Yes.
How have you dealt with him with it? Or have you?
I mean, it was interesting because it was like in the middle of class, so I couldn't obviously have as much time as I wanted, but I did try to. My first like instinct was like, you're wrong. I wanted to just overtly attack him, but like I kind of just sat down with, and I just asked him with just open-ended yes or no questions, like, so why do you think that that's fair? Do you think that that's in your right to say? Mm-hmm. You're just dispelling, this, generalization, or not dispelling, but, kind of putting it out there that what if indeed you do miss out the chance to meet an extraordinary individual or someone who you may find needed in your social network or even in your practice, in your career in the future, and you just choose to completely not interact with them or just treat them unfairly because of their race. How do you think that's fair? Or I even put him in the shoes, if I had any Middle Eastern descent, would that change your opinion of me? So
it's no matter what, the conversation is hard, and it's a real interesting transition between, because you guys are going to, Greg had a little bit of transition in there. I know Greg's backstory a little bit, but the natural progression of things is you go from high school to university, which transitions you to the real world. I went from high school to the real world, and now I'm transitioning to university, and there's this sort of weird idea that even when people are wrong, you have to come at it as a way that they're almost right, and you need to talk to them in that sort of way.
Yeah.
Whereas in the real world, most people will just flat out tell you, no, you're wrong. And in that case, depending on who, Greg's case, I keep forgetting I'm on radio, and I pointed at him, and your friend's case even, depending on where they say those things and who they say them to, your wrong might be the least of their concerns. Greg and I are from Toronto, and we both know there's certain parts of the city where if they were saying those words...
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm from Toronto as well, so...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are certain sections of the city where if you spout, like, anti-Arab stuff...
Oh, yes.
You know, it's going to be bad. The reason I bring that up is, no matter where you go, you're going to run into somebody who thinks that any form of racism is wrong. Me personally, any form of racism is wrong anywhere. So, if somebody is being really, really wrong... I don't think we should be afraid to tell them, hey, this isn't right. And then go into education. Because I firmly believe that the cure for racism is education.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And that's why it's just hard to sometimes tell them that they're wrong, even though they are. And it's not about being afraid. It's just about trying to be almost tactful. Because some people, especially... with such a touchy subject, are not really that willing to admit when they're wrong, especially if you're just blatantly telling them, and that gets hard not to do when they are being so egregiously wrong about it and going about it in the completely wrong way. So it's difficult to really work in a strategic education that actually is effective when they have this mindset that's so difficult to sway.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Bianca, I think you did an absolutely great job in that you didn't. You tried the good tact.
Yeah, I think just as humans, I don't know, and myself included, we hate.
You are human.
Yes, or am I? We hate to admit that we're wrong sometimes, like that it's seen as a weakness, and we don't want to show that at all. And I see that in some people, that once you address something that they said wrong, they kind of, you just, I don't know, you see their face drop a bit.
Yeah.
Like they don't want to admit it.
So and this conversation is going absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, I need to stop for a minute. We need to do the promos and stuff like that. So we'll be back with the forum in just a few moments, and we'll be back with Greg and Bianca, and of course David. I'm always here, and we'll see you in just a second.
My name is Marcus. I'm in second year engineering. You're listening to 94.9 CHRW.